Hello listeners, Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you this podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people who are just starting out in their careers, in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there and done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas or some new insight, or just comforted knowing that they are not alone. Everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of feeling stuck. Today, I am very excited to be celebrating two milestone moments. One is that this is the 60th episode of the podcast series. And the second is that it's our 1 year anniversary, woohoo, of the podcast. That's right, 1 year ago on August 20th was my first episode. So far, I've published 59 episodes and conducted 60 interviews. And if you're doing the math, you might be thinking, wait a minute, if this is a 1 year anniversary, wouldn't there just be 52 interviews? But I published sometimes 2 interviews a week because I had so many great stories, I had to get them out there. So since this is the 1 year anniversary, I thought I would share a bit about how and why I got started with the podcast to begin with, and then also share some of the highlights and themes that I learned along the way. So let's start with the whys. Basically, I've got 4 of them. The first is that I have nieces and nephews who are at that age of just starting out. And so many times the questions that I ask in the interviews, or actually when I created my original list of questions, they were in my mind and their voices are in my head as I'm doing the interviews. The second reason is I was part of a mentoring circle that was really impactful for me. And in that mentoring circle, it was all about storytelling. In fact, you couldn't even give advice. We'd have to take a time out if someone shifted to advice mode. It was all about sharing challenges, getting through challenges, and then storytelling around those challenges so that we could learn from each other. And there's something about storytelling that's more impactful than advice, because advice can feel like it's being thrown at you, but storytelling is something that you can relate to. My third why is that I was part of a leadership program last summer. And in that program, the assignment was to come up with a project that touched anywhere from 20 to 200 people. And I had been toying with this idea of creating a podcast, trying to capture more stories for my business, and so realized that that was going to be the perfect project for this class. And by the way, I blew away the numbers on the 20 to 200 within the first couple months. Lastly, I have a natural curiosity for people's stories and a passion for celebrating them. I have a passion for finding out from people their stories about, how did I get here? I believe that ordinary people do extraordinary things every day. They just go unnoticed. And I want to change that. I want to bring those extraordinary stories out. Here's a teaser about just 3 of the extraordinary stories that came out of this last year. The first is from Rachel Lyons, episode 13. She's leading a nonprofit organization whose mission is to cultivate a global community of citizen astronauts, who then transform the world as social impact ambassadors. And oh, by the way, she's 24. Then there's Michelle Ashby, episode 21. She's training an army of 1,000 women who are ready to sit on corporate boards. And then Shane Bauman, episode 22. He's a disruptor in the financial services industry, up to something really big, eradicating poverty. So what have I learned from a year's worth of interviews? Well, first off, I found out that I say the words cool, awesome, and wow a lot. But mainly that's because these stories are so cool, awesome, and wow. But I am trying to kind of take those filler words out of my vocabulary. Okay, so what did I really learn from these interviews? Let's get to the good stuff. After going down memory lane, taking this trip and revisiting all 60 of the interviews, I identified 14 different themes and patterns and key learnings that I thought were very interesting to me, and I thought that then would be interesting to you. Of course, I tried to get them into 10, but I couldn't. So anyway, there's 14. I'll describe each one briefly along with highlights from some of the people that referenced it to give it a little bit of context. And then I'll also include the episode number in case you want to go back and listen to it. The first topic or learning theme really encompasses 3 different subtopics. And so this first topic I'm calling trusting yourself, trusting your gut, or trusting your intuition. But I think what really fits into that is the word confidence, intuition, and risk-taking. And those three things were mentioned over and over by probably all of the interviewees, but some of them highlighted one of those subtopics as kind of their guiding force. So let's start with those who reference confidence. Joan Miller, episode 4, in response to some questions about roles she was taking in her early 20s, where she was volunteering to lead big projects for her companies, who was stepping into new industries and new markets. And when I asked her, well, how did you know you could do this? She said she must have been born with an extra dose of confidence. J.C. Heinen, episode 58, in response to a question about having any doubts or fears when she proposed to lead new solutions when she'd never really done that exact thing before, the thing she said was, things always worked out in the past, so they'll continue to work out going forward. And by the way, she also mentioned that it's not that she didn't have doubt and fear, it's just that she knew that things always worked out in the past, so therefore she had a confidence that they would work out going forward. Bob Newman in episode 37, he was talking about making cold calls when he wanted to break into a new market or a new industry, which was into the commercial furniture industry, which he had not been in before. And he was starting to cold call executives in that industry. And, his confidence was, I just expected that these executives would take my call. So here's 3 examples of how confidence really played out in their lives and in how it played out in their careers going forward. Intuition is kind of the next theme that several people mentioned. Dr. Debbie O'Reilly, episode 56, she actually had a dream that had a message in it telling her to become a chiropractor. And at first she resisted this message. She didn't really think that applied to her, and she really didn't want to go back and do any more schooling. But after talking to her fiance about it, who then encouraged her, and then who was visiting a chiropractor and gave him some information on how she could get started, she went down the path and is now a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, and I think a holistic healer, and just loving it. So sometimes your intuition comes in an actual dream. Suzanne Mitchell, episode 46, talks about how she would gather other people's information and insight, that she didn't expect that she knew everything that she needed to know, so she had to gather that information. But she did have the intuition, and she trusted her intuition to know how to move forward once she gathered enough information. The last subtopic under this trusting yourself was risk-taking. This is a big part of what a lot of people brought up in their interviews. And as you know, I also start with asking people where they sit on the risk meter. So it's always fascinating when they give that answer at the beginning and then how it plays out through the interview. Danny Chacon, episode 49. He's either all in or he's all out. That's the quote, as well as big risk and big reward. And this really fits Danny because he's a master trainer in the field of martial arts, and he's a professional athlete, and he's competed on the world stage. So you really can't get to the world stage if you're not all in. Susie Zhang, episode 3, and Helen Raleigh, episode 33. Both of these women migrated from China to the United States. Talk about taking big risks, right? And not only did they leave their families, their culture, everything familiar to them behind, but also they moved with only minimal English language skills, very little money, very little contacts in the US, but they found their way, they found their careers, and then they had very successful lives. So their risk-taking ability really played out throughout their lives, and is still playing out today now that you hear what they're up to today. Last example here is David DeCamillis, episode 42. He had 4 different careers, and I want to just share his words of wisdom. He says, be willing to take risks, especially when you're young. Don't worry so much about what you're studying. It's experiences and taking risks that lead to learning. So that first theme was about trusting yourself. This next theme is about trusting others, or trusting in the guidance provided by others. Several people mentioned actually they didn't listen to the guidance of others initially. There was some resistance to that, but when they finally did, they were amazed at what the outcomes were. So it's kind of funny that some people did trust others, some didn't at first, but when they did, then that really helped them in their careers. We'll start off with Brianna Rossi, episode 8. Both of her parents were in business, so she's like, well, I don't want to do that. So she decided to go down more of a biology route. And then after graduating, looking at the jobs that were out there, and then gravitating toward a nonprofit, she ended up being more in a marketing and a business role. So she kind of laughed at herself that she didn't want to be there, but that's where she's ended up. Katie Arvidson, episode 12. After college, she traveled the world. She had a wanderlust and wanted to experience different things and had some dreams in life to experience that. And then when she moved back, there were some roles that she was offered, but they just didn't seem right, so she turned them down. But then she was pretty frustrated because it just wasn't happening, and she didn't really know what she wanted, but she didn't find the right thing. So it's like she knew the ones that were being presented didn't seem right, but the right ones weren't being presented. So she's frustrated, calls her dad, and she was quite surprised. He had been supporting her dreams all along, but in this particular call, it was more about some tough love and some words of wisdom. And from that call, then she realized, well, she wasn't happy, number one, because she wanted support and comfort. But she realized that I need to pay my dues. And so she went ahead and took a job with a friend's dad, and she had turned down this job before, but she went ahead and took that job, and it led to great things, and it led to where she is now. Kim Carver, episode 25. Just after graduating from college, her parents and her sister inform her that they've arranged for her to take a job with her sister in Japan. That's a pretty big step in trusting others. But anyway, she was very open to this idea, and it got her a great start, and then it took off, and it led again to great things in her whole career. So she's very appreciative of them arranging that job for her. A last example is with Chris Cook, episode 34. His dad was suggesting that he should try being a ski instructor since he had competed as a ski racer and he was interested in teaching. But Chris was resistant to the idea. He had tried some other things and then got kind of frustrated with that and they weren't working out. But finally then he decided that he would appease his dad and try being a ski instructor. And he loved it. And once again, it led to another opportunity and another opportunity, and it led to great things for Chris. Another theme that came up regularly was talking about core competencies and where your gifts are, finding where your gifts and your strengths are. And it was an interesting topic because not everyone knew what their core competencies were when they started out. In fact, many did not. They really needed to find and get into roles, and maybe it was started in college and then moved into first jobs, etc., is when they had enough data points then to recognize what their core competencies were. And, oh, by the way, sometimes other people brought up what their core competencies were. It wasn't necessarily that they could see them, which I know is true for me, is that I didn't really see them until other people pointed them out. When they're a core competency, a lot of times you don't recognize the value of what it is. It's just, well, can't everybody do that? Anyway, one great example of this was Fallon Velez, episode 47. And she had always played with technology. She was always tinkering, fixing remotes. She was a gamer at a young age, but she never really saw technology as a career for her until others started suggesting it. And now she's running 2 technology companies that she's founded, Teach Geek and Teach Geek Academy. So kind of crazy that it was so obvious, but yet not to her. Daniel Widridge, episode 16. After, again, exploring a few jobs out of college, one day he found this free programming software. And he just started playing with it because that's why it was free. That was the approach was, play with it, see if you like it, and then this might be a career for you. And he started playing with it. It felt like solving a puzzle for him. It was super fun. He really enjoyed it, and he found he was really good at it. But then he had to overcome kind of a mindset shift that he thought programmers were super smart people, and he didn't think of himself as being super smart. So he finally had to get over that, you know what, I can do this because I was playing with software, and I can do this, and I can do this. So anyway, once he got over his mindset, now he's in a very successful career as a programmer. Another cool theme and lesson learned was about people who are very curious and exploring the world, and that's how they found their way and found their career. Start again with Katie Arvidson, episode 12. Again, she talked about, I talked about how she traveled the world and, really felt it was important for her to see the world before she found that career. And her words of wisdom: go play, experiment, especially when you're in your 20s. Work will always be there, and what you learn along the way will help you later in life. Jennifer Henneman, episode 52, she kept following her areas of interest. She took a break to travel and explore the world after she got her master's, and then started on a career path, and then said, wait a minute, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Took a chance on a PhD program, again, a little bit more school, but again, she's very curious. She got in, she got accepted, completed the program, and then a friend had recommended that maybe she consider a curator job versus a professor job after she got her PhD. She did that, applied for it, got the job, and she's now back in Colorado. But it's funny because she says, even with all of that education and all that she's doing now, she still has so much to learn. So that curious bug doesn't ever go away. Stacy Taubman, episode 11. She wanted to find out what made the businesswomen in her community successful. After conducting 200 interviews, she realized that she's basically done a qualitative research project on the subject. And through this experience, she discovered the business that she wanted to start. And now she's running 2 facilities in 2 different states. So her curiosity has led her to a lot of great things. So many that I interviewed have reinvented themselves. So again, a very common theme, this reinvention. And I counted at least 12 throughout 12 out of the 60 reinvented themselves. So I'm going to kind of go through these quick. There's some that are pretty big in terms of what they reinvented themselves as. We got John Garrett, episode 17. He went from CPA to comedian, and then now he's a keynote speaker and a culture consultant. Gayla Weck, episode 48. Her dream was to become a police officer, which she did. She then transitioned into corporate security, which is somewhat of a natural, logical step next. But her extreme move or extreme reinvention is what she's doing now. She is a love relationship coach and loving it. Raylene Decatur, episode 39, her dream was to be a museum director, which she accomplished. But now she's reinvented herself as a leadership and a strategy coach. David D. Camillus, episode 42. I already mentioned him in the risk-taking theme, but he describes his journey as having 4 different careers. He was first a financial advisor, then he was in real estate investments, then entertainment business. He was running, big entertainment events and managing bands, and then now he's in the IT space. And he's very purposefully in the IT space because he does want something that's recession-proof. I'm going to mention Stacy Taubman again, episode 11. She went from being a math teacher to running her own businesses. Bob Newman, episode 37. He started out as a model. He was then drawn to the commercial furniture business, then to being a leadership coach, and now he's a business consultant. Our last example of reinvention is Suzanne Mitchell, episode 46. Her dream was to be a stay-home mom, but that changed when she and her husband had the opportunity to start their own printing company. So basically, she went from being stay-home mom to being president of a printing company. Let's talk about dream jobs. What I found was most people don't know what they want to do and be when they grow up, but there are those who do, and they were definitely the exception to the rule. 12 out of the 60 knew what they wanted to do and be. Danny Garino, episode 6, a musician and a songwriter. He discovered this at age 8. Aaron Owens, episode 18, politics was his dream, and he ended up being a campaign manager by the age of 24. Bridget Aids, episode 19. She said, I think at the age of 11, she knew she wanted to be an entrepreneur, and she wanted to own her own beauty salon. And she did that 2 days after finishing high school. Robert Hamm, episode 26. His dream was to be an actor, and he did so. He moved to New York City and he was on a soap opera, and then, as he described it, some off Broadway plays. Caitlin Tusick, episode 35. Her dream was to be an artist, and she is, and she's actually displayed, her work is displayed locally here in the Denver community. Raylene Decatur, episode 39, mentioned her earlier, museum director. Skylar Del Sol, episode 43, professional volleyball player, and he's still out there competing. Gayla Wick, episode 48, police officer. Katie Brinkley, episode 53, sportscaster. Stacy Todman, episode 11, teacher. Okay, we're halfway through. We're on theme or learning point number 7. This is about a purposeful path. So a couple people had mentioned once they kind of understood where they wanted to go, they then became very purposeful in their path on how they wanted to get there. Others, sometimes kind of knew and then kind of had a path, or they can connect the dots backwards, but not necessarily forward. But these 2 examples were very purposeful in their path. David Harriman, episode 55. Following his mentor's advice, he decided to go into insurance. Not necessarily his passion, but one that he knew would be a stable career. He then made a plan on how he was going to do this, and he stuck to this plan, even though there were tough times, especially in the beginning, and there were times when he was feeling bored. But then, once he had kids, which is also what the mentor was coaching him on, once you have kids and once you have this stable industry or career, it'll all make sense. And that's exactly what happened to David. In fact, his quote or his words of wisdom is, "A switch got flipped and I never again cared that I was bored. That feeling that my work had to be my purpose went out the window. My kid was my purpose. Now, not being defined by my work, I'm suddenly able to enjoy my job more than ever. I really love what I do." David Blaha, episode 59, also a very purposeful path. Once he decided that he wanted to be general manager, he then made decisions on how to acquire the acumen and the experience needed to get there. So this topic actually is a very individual topic, and only one person brought this up, but it was so unique and something that I could relate to that I wanted to mention that. And that's this notion of being a MultiPotentialite. I don't even know if I can say that right. Anyway, R.H. Hinkson, episode 31, introduced me to this term. And again, it's MultiPotentialite. And he was so excited when he found this term because he was always frustrated when people were like, "Oh, what's your purpose in life? What's your gift? What's your calling? What are you out to accomplish?" And he has been involved in so many different things, and he's interested in so many different things. And by the way, he's really good at so many different things. He didn't ever want to be defined by one thing. So when he found this term MultiPotentialite, which means that you excel in a number of different things and pursue a number of different interests. And so that really helped him kind of get over this notion of you have to have just one purpose or one calling. And I would say too, I can really relate to this because I'm in that same mode in terms of variety of skill set, variety of interests, variety of careers. There's no secret playbook. This is a very interesting theme or topic that Brenda Kaiser-Berger, episode 29, brought up. She had a boss who said, "Brenda, you think there is a secret playbook that you don't have access to. I trust your judgment. I trust that you've done your homework. So now just go do it." And Cheryl Campbell, episode 36, similarly, she had an aha moment one day that no one else has done this either, so why shouldn't it be me? Number 10, this theme actually 8 different people brought this up, and it's all about making things better, seeing where there's gaps, seeing where there's problems, and proposing solutions, and then leading those solutions in many cases. But it's about making things better. And 8 different people brought this up, so I'm just going to rattle off their names because I think I've already mentioned their episodes. Joan Miller, Brenda Kaiser-Berger, Chris Cook, Cheryl Campbell, Raylene Decatur, J.C. Heinen, Aaron Owens, Teresa Anazeski. Okay, she was episode 1. I don't think I mentioned her before. Anyway, all of those folks talked about that was a big part of their success, was proposing, finding ways to make things better, proposing solutions, and then leading those solutions. Ooh, I like this one. Shelf life. Diane Zeil, episode 44. She brought up this notion that every leader has a shelf life. So her words of wisdom is, every leader has a shelf life. Knowing what yours is important. It doesn't mean you always have to leave, but it raises the question on how you might reinvent yourself or what else you can be doing. David Blaha, episode 59, he didn't really mention the term shelf life, but his similar comment was about, once you've mastered an area, you'll know that because things get easy. And so he believes people are at their best and greatest when learning and growing, which usually comes from doing new things and being uncomfortable. A big part of the podcast is about being in transition or feeling stuck. But it's also about knowing when it's not a fit, which is our next topic. And sometimes knowing when it's not a fit can show up in a couple of ways. Physically, mental anguish, physical ailments, that type of thing. But also it can show up in, it's just you can tell because it doesn't fit your values. I'll start with the physical and mental ailments. Janaea Cunningham, episode 14. After she leaves a series of IT jobs, the migraines and the other physical ailments disappear. And it took her about 3 months to kind of recognize that and then realize, oh, maybe that wasn't a right fit for me. Danielle Dupre, episode 57. She actually thought she had something physically wrong with her. She couldn't focus, she had a lot of anxiety, she was really tired all the time. And then she realized that the job wasn't really working out. So she ends up leaving the job, and then all of those things cleared up. She's now in the right job and totally enjoying it. From a values perspective and knowing that those things just aren't aligned, Adam Kemper, episode 45. He calls certain parts of his career the I have to chapter and the dark ages. Obviously, that wasn't a fit for him. Sarah Hendricks, episode 24. She discovered that startups weren't for her. And because she likes more structure. But she really tried to make it work for about 3 years. Mainly because she thought, as a millennial, shouldn't I love startups? Shouldn't this be where I need to be? But she realized later, structure's more for her, and the role she's in now is her dream job. R.H. Hinkson, episode 31. He was prepared to quit when his company decided not to honor the payout they offered at the beginning of a contest. He said, it's all about honoring your word. And once he approached them with his resignation, they understood how serious he was, and they understood how serious it was not to honor their word. And they did go back and honor the payout, and he ended up staying with that company. I don't think any list of learnings about careers would be complete if you didn't add the term hard work. And that term came up probably, I don't know, at least half the time in terms of people saying, but you got to do the work. You can't just have the ideas, you got to do the work. 2 that really stood out for me, though, were our 2 professional athletes, Skylar Del Sol, episode 43, and Danny Chacon, episode 49. And mainly I think the hard work stands out for them, but this was really the theme for both of them, because you can't compete on world stages if you don't do the work. And many times I think their philosophy would be if you don't outwork your competition. Okay, we're at the last one, 14. Overcoming mindset and getting unstuck. Abby Guerrero, episode 9. In discovering what's next for her career, she finally releases the notion that the next steps needs to be perfect. She had this ideal Her mantra, if I feel 80% sure, then I'll be all right. She's self-aware and knows how important it is to take care of herself to be at her best, especially during times of major change. Her words of wisdom, make sure you're doing something. It doesn't have to be the perfect thing. Anything is better than being stagnant, and it will steer you in a direction. What great words of wisdom. And oh, by the way, I think she's about 24. A second example of overcoming mindset and getting unstuck is Janaea Cunningham, episode 14. And her journey is one of early setbacks and trauma that initially conditioned her to accept a life that is thrust upon her, not one that she chooses. She's resigned to thinking her dreams and goals aren't important, that taking care of others comes first, and what she wants comes second. A pivotal moment is when she realized she has a choice and that she is responsible for her health and her happiness. So now in her 40s, her journey is about living a happy, joyful life and helping others achieve the same. Wow, what an amazing amount of insight and wisdom. Many thanks to all of you who I interviewed who shared your stories and your wisdom. Through this last year, I have gained so much. I've been reconnecting with friends and family, learning new cool things about each of you, meeting and connecting new friends. I've gotten reminders about strengths I possess but forgot that I had, or maybe wasn't giving myself credit for. I've been revisiting fond memories about great bosses, about the teams that I led or that was a part of. I'm thinking about the accomplishments that I'd forgotten. And then one of these stories brings it all back to me. So that's just been so rewarding. And then I've gotten so many new ideas and inspiration and energy to tackle challenges and kind of overcome those feelings of being stuck or maybe being bored or feeling scratchy. And then lastly, the insight and wisdom about when to be open to listening to others and when to trust yourself. So powerful. That's what I've gained over this last year. But I also reached out to my group of interviewees, and I had over a dozen people respond with just wonderful comments about what they did gain out of it. And I wish I could read them all, but I know there is a time limit to this. But I am going to read 3 because they were just so meaningful, and I'm celebrating, so I wanted to celebrate myself as well. Aaron Owens, episode 18, says, there's something both cathartic and inspiring about just sitting with your own story. And Kathy gave me such a wonderful vehicle in which to experience that when she invited me to share my story on her podcast, How Did I Get Here? Before that, so much of my story seemed like random tidbits, disconnected from one another. However, her questions forced me to find the common threads, acknowledge the themes, and hunt for the lessons and applications. Ostensibly in order to help others, but inconspicuously in order to help myself. She's like a ninja. I've shared that episode with friends, new and old, as a way to say this is who I am. And embarrassingly, I've listened to it multiple times myself for the same reason. I'm forever grateful for this gift and for Kathy Lawless. Oh, isn't that sweet? Lauren Anazeski, my niece, episode 2. Participating in your podcast was such a cool experience, especially as a young person whose life has changed so much in the last year. It is neat to look back on the Lauren who did your podcast a year ago. As a college student, it has been wonderful to hear about other people's paths, twists, and turns, and all. The question of how did I get here is great for all ages, even for a student who is still at the beginning of her journey. The podcast makes everyone feel special. My story is worth sharing. I've been more aware of my thoughts, habits, and practices over the last year, and I think that listening to the podcast has given me greater insight into how others think and react. I love hearing about how other people's personal lives, interests, and passions intersect with their work. The podcast is very holistic. As a young person, your podcast keeps me feeling hopeful and energetic in these dark times. There is so much out there, and you can't connect the dots forward. I'm so impressed and inspired by all your hard work on this podcast and networking. You're an incredible role model and have inspired me to work on courageous networking. So proud. Love you. Oh, love you too, Lauren. And Katie Arvidson, episode 12. Kathy's podcast, How Did I Get Here, brought me a great appreciation of the leaders in my personal and professional life. It was so inspiring to reflect on the chapters of my career and how blessed I've been to work and learn under good leadership. The series also opened my eyes to the careers and stories of friends that participated. There were paths and challenges one of my closest friends, Sarah Hendricks, had been through that I never knew of. It gave us a chance to connect around the risks we faced and took early in our careers, and has inspired more of a drive in both of us to keep taking risks and driving more adventures in our personal and professional lives. I feel so lucky and honored to have been on your podcast. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Katie. I am so grateful for all of these wonderful people in my life who shared their stories with such authenticity. We got to hear the highs, the lows, the pivots, the aha moments, the lessons learned, and amazing words of wisdom. Thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough for being part of this last year of interviews of How Did I Get Here? I hope you all enjoyed this recap of the highlights as much as I enjoyed putting it together and this wonderful trip down memory lane. Thank you for watching and listening. Here's to another year of amazing stories. Cheers. Happy 1-year anniversary to me. Happy 1-year anniversary to me.